Whew. Hello and welcome back once again to the Single Malt Review. This episode brought to you by Campbell, who you've seen before. He is otherwise a fairly innocuous black cat, so hopefully he'll be well behaved. This one, as I suggested last video, is another Edrington Group blend, and it's another one of the sort of really big blends. Not as big as Famous Grass, as we were looking at last time, but it's certainly very, very established and important, I think. So we should run over that, because I think it is a blend with a few differences that kind of make it stand apart.
Cutty Sark is rather a different beastie from Famous Grass, and like Famous Grass, we've also tried a more slightly elite version of this blend before in the form of the Prohibition edition.
They do. I think they still do that. Cutty Sark there seems to be a recent trend in large, popular blending companies to completely nix all their aged blends, like the lot of them. Cutty Sark used to have a 12, 18, 21, went on and on. No longer. They've gone away with Valentine's and a few other people and have stopped doing their aged ones.
I guess when you're a blender and everybody going to run up against, say, Johnny Walker as their competition.
I really don't know, because they had them for years and years, and now they don't. So maybe it's to do with the rising popularity of single malt. They're holding a bit more back for that. I don't know. Not a bad thing if that's the case. So anyway. So I said this was a little bit of a blend with a difference, and a lot of it is in the presentation of the whisky. You'll notice this pretty striking green bottle. It's one of the very, very few whiskies still served in a green bottle, and that allows them to do something that a lot of other blends don't, which is to put very, very little colouring in there, which is really, really good to see. I've called this sort of the colour of honesty before, and it is still coloured, but probably only for the purposes of consistency more than anything else. This is for a blend that is probably has an average of maybe 5 years old, and that might be being a little bit generous. This is the colour you'd expect
very
it to
plausible
be.
colour.
Yeah, it could just be this little glass of Chablis we've got here. Not a lot going on at all. And the green bottle allows them to really hide that, I suppose. Hide that from maybe consumers who were fooled into thinking colour has anything to do with quality with these cheap whiskies. And so they'll have to find out the ghastly truth once they bring it home. And then be forced to try Cutty Sark's whiskey anyway, at which point I think I would challenge anyone not to be just a wee bit pleased, because I think this is quite a good wee blend. It is a very honest blend, and it has a very suitable, I think, style for the type of whiskey it is. It's very, very, very Speyside-y. It's very, very sort of crisp, fruity, crunchy, fresh. Yeah, I don't know. You'll have to see what you think, because I have, as we can see, enjoyed plenty of this whiskey, and I think I'm a fan of this one. So see if we can get you on board.
Official stats on, say, amount of grain spirit, or perhaps the relative ratios?
I mean, I always go back to most stock standard blends. It's about a 60-40, 60 being the grain. That changes as blends get older and more expensive. That might start to tip in the whiskies, or rather the Scotch's favour, malt whiskey's favour. This one, 60-40, I think would be a pretty good bet on any given game day. So yeah, do not expect to avoid any grain influence.
But speaking as we were of grain influence, there is a lot less of it here than there was in the Famous Grouse. That is much bigger on the whiskey.
I think what there is there's actually less on the nose, but in doing less, I think we're smelling slightly more pleasant things. That, for whatever reason, that grain is much calmer on this one. There isn't that savage edge coming slashing your nostrils.
Yeah, and the initial impressions, they're taking me straight to Speyside.
No, very nice, fresh, fruity, white-fleshed fruits.
Waxy, peachy.
Yeah, apple, pear, nectarine, that kind of things. And it's not being bulldozed by this huge whack of grain spirit.
Hint of cheesecake right at the end. I like that.
Citrus cheesecake. So, good, crisp, refreshing on the nose. We'll see what's on the palate.
Oh, that is alarmingly thin and watery at first, but it's got a kind of a slow burn. There's this gentle, creamy citrus which starts to build after a few seconds.
Crisp and refreshing on the nose, and I think quite crisp and refreshing on the palate as well.
Yeah, it started off distressingly thin to me, but that did mercifully go away quite quickly. It would have been a real downer if that kind of consistency had persisted.
And so it's sort of very light, almost a little, I think, ethereal. We probably tasted them the wrong way around. They're very, very heavy Famous Grouse, I think maybe sort of primed taste buds the wrong direction, because this is a much lighter touch. Yeah, it is light, ethereal, very, very crisp. Crisp is, I mean, this is when I talk about texture and people get angry, but crispness is definitely, it's a mixture between sort of nice, snappy, sharp acidity and lighter, crisper flavours. And that's sort of where those meet, then you get this sort of crisp, crunchy whiskey, and I really like it.
Yeah, it's got the light, accessible quaffability of, say, a middle ground white wine, like a New Zealand Chardonnay, or perhaps of a medium-bodied cider. It's the same kind of, it's like snappy, very slightly sharp, but otherwise light on the tongue and easygoing.
It does have a slightly sort of appley, malic acid quality to it, which, funnily enough, is present in both apples and Chardonnay, depending on the degree of malolactic fermentation they have undertaken.
And after a couple of sips, that what seemed like a thin or watery quality of spirits is kind of transformed into just an easygoing and drinkable quality.
It is uncomplex, but whereas the Famous Grouse that was sort of a battle between flavours we didn't really want to be tasting versus ones that had a bit more merit to them. Though this isn't a fireworks display of flavour, I think the flavours in there none of them are bad. They all work well together.
Yeah.
You're not trying to sort of taste away from some dodgy, the grain spirit is not aggressive like it was with the Famous Grouse. So how they've achieved this, I really don't know.
Yeah, the flavours are way more subtle here, but they're much more harmonious, including the grain alcohol, which you'd think on a lighter flavoured whiskey should dominate, but it really doesn't.
I think the grain alcohol might be a little bit older, might be a few years older on this one. It is a more expensive whiskey. It is any given special to special, it will change. I think this is a duty-free bottle. They don't normally trade in the 1 litre. They normally, which is another, that's another sort of quality statement, bit of manoeuvring on them. 700ml bottles. You just look at them as more expensive things because big cheap blends come in big cheap bottles. So this is non-standard Cutty here, but it is about at least 10-20% more expensive than Famous Grouse. So that suggests there's something a wee bit pricier in there.
Well, it's significantly better, I think. So probably worth the extra investment. This is great on its own.
I really like this.
Famous Grouse struggled to hold its own as a standalone dram.
This one almost counter to the Famous Grouse. It can take an ice cube. It's already quite fluid, fast-moving, refreshing, so if it gets a wee bit more dilute, it can handle that. It just turns into kind of a longer drink.
I'm going to try it in just a tiny splash of water.
I've never actually tried it with straight water in it. I've only ever tried it with ice, but it's similar practice.
Yeah. Now, I should say, our city recently, regrettably, had to chlorinate its water supply after decades of being just completely pure straight out of the ground. So we're taking measures to avoid that. We want to keep the water consistent, obviously, so we're not tainting anything we're trying. So just to put it out there, we have taken steps to make sure we're not chlorinating our whiskey in the process. Yeah,
that would be a sad story, especially for a delicate one like this. What was I saying? Ooh. Yes, this one does not blend very well. It is quite a poised whiskey, and if it gets knocked about by any other flavours, I think it topples quickly. It is good on its own, and that's pretty good for a cheap no-age statement blend that you can just sort of sip on it by itself. That's kind of a thumbs up for me. How's it going with a bit of water?
It's it has changed it slightly. It's kind of this is a bit odd, but it's brought out a little bit of what I'd call a Sauvignon Blanc edge to it. It's kind of honed it, sharpened it slightly, so it's a bit more of a prickle there. It's maybe exacerbated the grain alcohol slightly, but the overall effect is just it dances on the tongue a little more. It's got a little more of a sort of like a sharper white wine quality happening.
There you go. It brings out a bit more of the acid, maybe. This, if you haven't gathered already, I quite like this. This is, of all the no-age statement cheap blends that I've tried, I think this is probably one of my favourites. It's also one of the more expensive. Like as I said, this is on a... If the other one's a bottom shelf, this is on a shelf... There's a special shelf for this one, halfway between the bottom and the next one up, where you've got your, Glenfiddies and so forth sitting about. Or your Shivers 12, maybe.
How would you rate it?
This one, for me, I'm going to go quite a wee bit higher than the previous, and this one's going to be a 76. I think it's really quite strapping stuff here for a blend with no numbers on the label, and still a pretty budget price tag. What do you think?
I'd elevate it, up to a 74. I'm pleased. I'm enjoying it. It's not deep or complex. It's not a rich flavour explosion, but what it does clearly, cleanly, and very accessibly. This is such a good, easy drinking whiskey, and as a blend, it stands up really well. It is fine, completely fine on its own.
And there you go. Cutty Sark floats my boat.
Yeah.
Slanja.